George, what's the worst thing about living in Britain? That's right. It's how ugly this country is. It's disgusting, terrible, awful.
Bransfield.
Psygnosis really has a hold of my nostalgia gland, it turns out, able to give it a tickle or a squeeze and milk out some of its fresh love of the past. That really got away from me quickly. Basically what I mean is, when I hark back to the glory days of the original PlayStation, back when I didn't have responsibilities and so did have time to play video games and I didn't have a headache all the time, perhaps drinking more water will cure that. When I look back on that era, I invariably end up on one Psygnosis game or another. Wipeout, G-Police, Destruction Derby, yeah, that's Reflections, but Psygnosis published it, so it counts. They're all series that snap my rose-tinted gaze into that lovely, warm, soft focus we all love so much when reminiscing, grasping tightly of the poisoned chalice that is empty nostalgia. What I'm saying is, I put Colony Wars on the other day and it's ended up being one of the only games I've completed in 2021. A, because it's brilliant and worth playing still, and B, because you can actually complete, air quotes, it quickly by failing the early missions. You still get an ending. Plus, Secret Extra C is not actually brilliant, but it is still thoroughly impressive and full of the sorts of flourishes that made it stand out in the mid to late 90s on PlayStation. For those who don't have my brain nor have done any reading or experienced it for themselves, I'm sure there's some of you, Colony Wars was Star Wars and Battlestar Galactica, the series from the 70s at least, and Star Trek and Babylon 5 all rolled into one. It mixed the quick-paced laser-blasting space dogfights of Star Wars and Battlestar's wonderful pew-pew heavy sci-fi with the political machinations of J. Michael Straczynski's beloved pew-pew heavy sci-fi, which also had a good story, but lots of pew-pew, and Londo, who's fantastic, but I digress. And it had some Star Trek, mainly in the ship designs and the pew-pew heavy sci-fi. Now, Colony Wars was lacking in areas as a game, I'll get to that, and its story wasn't exactly literary genius, but it worked. As a game, you enjoyed the rush of the pursuit in the inky blackness, pew-pewing a gorgeous array of lasers at twinkling specks or hulking space behemoths until you were met with a small boom, an incredible big boom, or your own death. It was exciting and felt like you were being strategic at times, that you were battling against the odds and that you were the hero of this spacefaring tale of excitement and combat and more combat and excitement. As a story, Colony Wars did a great job of showing you that you were, in fact, little more than an intergalactic cog in the intergalactic wheel of intergalactic politicking. For a Sony-made game, Psygnosis was a Sony studio, released on the PlayStation, then the world's most popular console, backed by a massive marketing campaign to dabble in, dare I say it aloud, politics. Well, it's telling that Colony Wars still stands out in video games as one of the few mainstream titles to so overtly broach the topic. What remains so engaging about Colony Wars' story to me is that it's not actually a tale of you as a hero, and it's not a story of you as a part of the League of the Free World, striking back heroically against the oppressive regime of the Tsar's Imperial Navy and the Earth Empire. Instead, it's a much more morally grey tale of an oppressed people pushing back against the oppressors, getting a taste for victory and following their ambition a step, well, a bit too far. This isn't just my deeper reading of the game's story either. Like I said, it's not exactly high art, Colony Wars' literature. Lead designer and writer Mike Ellis told the PlayStation blog, of all things, during early development we explored narrative concepts that became the backbone of the conflict. Things such as there being no evil bad guys. What if it really was just a fight between two factions that desperately needed rapidly depleting resources? What role would propaganda play in this conflict when there was a need to demonize the enemy? How far would they be willing to go with each viewing the other as a monster that was willing to destroy their homeworlds for their own selfish needs? There were multiple endings to Colony Wars, but the canonical one, the ending landed on when making the game's sequels, was, spoiler alert, that the good and true League of Free Worlds destroyed the warp gate leading to and from the Sol system, condemning those in the Earth Empire to a slow, withering death thanks to the lack of resources left in the ancestral home space counties. That's not the act of heroes and liberators, it's tyranny of another kind, and arguably crueler than the act, the destruction of a colony planet, that prompted the whole Colony Wars war to begin with. Your faceless player character, the intergalactic cog, was never the hero. Things would most certainly continue in this universe without your input. That's special. I won't say Colony Wars wasn't a power fantasy. Take out a capital ship, enjoy that explosion, then tell me with a straight face that this isn't all done to make you feel like an absolute badass. But at the same time, it was a blunted power. The ability to make small contributions that are otherwise largely irrelevant in the grand scheme. You might help, you might not, but there's always going to be an outcome here, and not a stop and try it again. It felt like there was freedom. There wasn't, but it felt like it was there. At the same time, you didn't want to indulge in that freedom, whether it was there or not, because the fight you were in was always so damn pressing. It felt important, life or death, an entire people at risk with you playing a part in the good fight. But was it a good fight? Bliss. If you haven't noticed yet, Colony Wars utterly captured my imagination. You saw so little of the universe in the game itself, making a journey more described than seen, but everything was so alive with the feeling that it had thought put into it. There were reasons why this was like this, why that wasn't like this. Again, not my imagination, as Ellis explained to the PS blog. While we weren't going to be able to explore all of the universe in gameplay, it was important that we were able to answer questions that we ourselves had and players may have about it in order to be more believable. It mattered to them enough to do it, so it mattered enough to me to bother investing in it. So when you lost a handful of missions in a row and were met with the absolute crushing of the League, the Tsar's personal titan entering colonial systems and wiping out any and all hints of an uprising, it made sense. You felt bad, but it was closure, and it worked logically. When you scrapped and scraped winning and losing missions and ended up with things essentially back to how they'd started out, or when your final mission was a desperate scrabble to fight back and save a peace treaty, it all made sense. It was all backed up by logical writing. It was brilliant. It was a rich universe, and to me at least, it mattered. There was a game called Colony Wars 2, apparently. I forget, too busy wanking on about the lore and atmosphere of the 47th century to notice that. I did say Colony Wars wasn't the best game, and that's because I meant those words. It's samey and limited, and the escort and protect missions are nigh on impossible at times, making frequent mission failures more of a chore than they should be with a story that adapts to your wins and losses. But it was fun, and it was good enough that I could be bothered to play it again in Space Year 2021, which is saying something because I do think most of my ability to enjoy myself has been utterly burned out. Haha, depression, you saucy minx. What lured most of us into Colony Wars back in '97, it's fair to say, was the look of the thing. It was a stunner. Screw it, present tense, it is a stunner, all things considered. This was just about pre-3D accelerator cards in PCs and still the early years of the 3D focused home consoles. To see a game that looked this good, that ran this well, that conveyed such a sense of place, of heft, it was special, and God did Colony Wars push the PS1 hard. It ran smoothly in the most part, but you got close to those capital ships and saw just how much strain the console was under pushing out the polygons. And blowing them up, well, nothing's ever been better. Few things speak to Psygnosis' mastery of PS1's GPU like the spectacle of a capital ship biting the dust in Colony Wars, said Edwin's Evan Thirlwell on Eurogamer, and he was so right in the statement I just lifted it wholesale instead of writing my own version of those words. Let's enjoy a capital ship exploding, just for a bit.
This is Command. Return to base, pilot. Nice work. This is Command. The space station has been destroyed. Return to base for further instructions.
Channel sequence initiated.
Colony Wars enjoyed 2 sequels. The third game, Red Sun, took things in a different direction, and while good in its own right, really stepped away from what made the first 2 so special. Basically, it had a full-on hero's journey / survival of the galaxy thing, and that was balls. The second game, here mentioned third, went by the subtitle Vengeance, and in it you played as an Imperial Navy recruit in the Sol system a century following the canonical ending of the first game, that being the warp gate being closed. It was a rare example of a genuine both-sidesing in, of all things, video games, and was the absolute best way to follow up the brilliance of the original's narrative. I will likely be back with longer videos about each at some point, though don't quote me on that. Colony Wars has, for all intents and purposes, been dead for 20 years now. Besides the sequels, we saw the combat-focused spin-off Blast Radius, which was fine, while most of the team behind the original game ended up making a licensed tie-in further down the line called Star Trek Invasion. It's Colony Wars 4 in all but name and plot, but though I'd have loved Worf to have been in Colony Wars, that would have stood out a bit too much. But it was a spiritual successor and is probably another one worth a video of its own somewhere down the line. But Colony Wars itself, it faded away around the time all space shooters enjoyed the same fate at the turn of the millennium. A hope remains that someone at Sony HQ would have the bright idea to get someone making a new version. Here in the year where there are so many rich, vibrant and exciting space games doing the rounds. Elite Dangerous, Everspace, not Star Citizen because that's never coming out. The time is right. All we need is someone to have the idea, pitch it successfully, find the perfect studio, get loads of money to do it right, actually make the thing over the course of a few years, hype it up carefully and correctly so it doesn't tank, sort out a launch that doesn't clash with everything else that's coming out and is more of a known and therefore better selling quantity, ensure the game's good enough to get glowing reviews from critics and influencers alike, pay off enough of those arsehole YouTubers to get glowing non-reviews, and eventually release the game and hope, with no control over the situation, for good enough sales to justify its creation in the first place. Easy. Bye!